It started as a flicker, a smudge of light on a deep space monitor that should have faded like cosmic dust. But last night, that flicker bloomed. 3I Atlas, the interstellar object once believed to be shrinking after its solar pass, has suddenly expanded. Not gradually, not by fragments breaking away, but in a single, violent surge. Telescopes across 3 continents caught it at the same moment. The object's luminous field swelled to nearly 5 times its previous diameter in under 12 minutes. No outgassing, no debris, just growth. And if you're watching this and you enjoy diving into the deepest, strangest corners of the cosmos, hit that like button and subscribe. Trust me, you'll want to see where this goes. Also, tell us where you're watching from and what time you started this video, because tonight, time itself seems to be part of the story. The explosion wasn't thermal, it wasn't gravitational. Spectral analysis shows the light curve bending in ways nothing inorganic should. Even stranger, the expansion stabilized at an exact ratio. 1.618. 1. The golden proportion. And that's when NASA quietly changed the classification from cometary body to unknown active system. By morning, half the world's observatories were locked on 3I Atlas. The rest were locked out. NASA's deep space network suddenly shifted to encrypted channels. ESA's data feed froze midstream, replaced by a single line of text. Spectral containment in progress. Containment for light. That's not something you write by accident. Amateur astronomers tried to fill the silence. They aimed backyard telescopes comparing notes through encrypted chat rooms. Several reported a thin halo surrounding the object, symmetrical, pulsating, as if an invisible membrane had inflated around it. A few captured the moment before their feeds were mysteriously throttled. Frame by frame, the halo didn't radiate outward like a blast. It folded, inward, then out again, like something breathing. Scientists offered theories, each more fragile than the last. Maybe trapped gases were venting from internal fractures. Maybe the body was a cluster of loosely bound fragments that had realigned. But the math refused to cooperate. The energy signature required for that kind of uniform expansion exceeds what sunlight could provide by a factor of 46. In short, something inside 3I Atlas did it. Theorist Dr. Elias Kaur from Caltech described it this way. It's as if the object briefly remembered it was larger than we thought, and corrected the mistake. No one laughed. Because when data from the James Webb arrays arrived, the shape wasn't spherical anymore, it was fractal, repeating hexagonal geometry, self-similar at every scale, the kind of structure you see in biological growth, not random physics. The object wasn't breaking apart, it was organizing. Meanwhile, subtle ripples began, appearing in our own magnetosphere. At first, they looked like routine solar interference, but their frequency matched the oscillation from 3I Atlas exactly. For the first time in recorded history, Earth's magnetic field was pulsing in sync with something interstellar. Across deep space communications networks, the hum reappeared, the same rhythm that haunted earlier 3I Atlas observations, now louder, sharper, almost deliberate. Engineers filtered it through spectrum analysis, expecting chaos. Instead, they found intervals, repeating patterns spaced precisely 29 hours apart. The same signature that once hinted at communication. Only this time, the intervals shortened. 28 hours, 27.5, 27. The pulse was accelerating. Inside NASA's Langley facility, sources claim a subdivision called Project Kairos reactivated dormant AI routines once used to translate pulsar timings. Their task? Decode the pulse. After 72 hours, the AI produced a partial reconstruction. Not language, not numbers, instructions, lines of geometry, nested spirals, and at the center a symbol no one expected to see again. The identical pattern first recorded when 3I Atlas entered the solar system years ago. It wasn't random then, and it's not random now. The object seems to be reassembling itself, and whatever triggered that expansion wasn't explosion, it was ignition. By evening, observatories noticed something else. As the object grew, its core darkened. Not like cooling, more like absorption. Infrared readings dropped to near zero, while the surrounding halo brightened to solar intensity. It's as though 3I Atlas is consuming its own shadow. When an intern at the Chilean observatory enhanced the time-lapse, she found a detail that froze the room. At the moment of expansion, the halo formed 7 symmetrical nodes, each pulsing independently before syncing to the central rhythm. 7 pulses, 7 repeating echoes in gravitational amplitude. It's the same signature seen in organic replication. 3i Atlas wasn't dying, it was dividing. NASA has since moved several monitoring satellites to shadow mode, cutting public feeds entirely. An internal memo leaked only 3 words: Containment Protocol Active. No one will confirm what that means, but across the encrypted spectrum the object's signal continues, constant, rhythmic, and unmistakably alive. And as it expands, our instruments keep catching brief bursts of reflected energy returning from Earth's own ionosphere, like radar pings bouncing back. The object isn't just growing, it's scanning. The story continues, and the deeper we look, the stranger it becomes. Because if the expansion of 3i Atlas wasn't an accident, then something out there just rewrote the laws of scale itself. And the question now isn't how big it will get, it's why it's still looking in our direction. By the time the world woke up, it was already too late to control the story. The blackout had done the opposite of what NASA intended. It fueled obsession. Citizen astronomers began pooling resources, sharing data in encrypted clusters disguised as weather networks. One collective, calling itself the Horizon Array, managed to patch together partial frames from telescopes in Argentina, Japan, and South Africa. What they found defied every official narrative. The object's halo wasn't static, it was forming architecture. Not random filaments or jets of dust, but geometric filigree, delicate repeating arcs that spiraled outward in mathematical harmony. When plotted against deep space coordinate grids, the pattern matched orbital resonance ratios, like something calibrating itself against the solar system's own rhythm. Each expansion pulse aligned perfectly with Earth's magnetic oscillation, as if 3i Atlas was sinking to our planet intentionally. At first, no one wanted to say it out loud, but in private channels a single word began circulating among researchers: entanglement. You see, in physics, entanglement means 2 systems share a state. Distance doesn't matter. What affects one instantly affects the other. Until now, that was just quantum theory, microscopic and fragile. But what if something had found a way to apply that same principle on an interplanetary scale? Magnetometers from Greenland to Patagonia began picking up micropulses that weren't of solar origin. Each spike corresponded exactly to 3i Atlas's new heartbeat. Whatever was happening out there was now happening here. Not metaphorically, but literally. And the strangest part, no one could locate the source. It wasn't radiating from above, it was coming from beneath. At the Borealis Subsurface Observatory in Iceland, sensors monitoring Earth's deep magnetic lines registered oscillations nearly identical to the interstellar pulse. When the team ran comparisons, they found that the harmonics emerging from Earth's core matched the new frequency within 4 decimal places. Our planet was vibrating in sympathy. 3i Atlas had become a tuning fork, and Earth was answering. Dr. Helena Sorensen, one of the lead geophysicists, put it best. It's as though we've been waiting for this note, and now something has finally struck the string. Her report was pulled within hours, her access revoked. The Borealis servers went offline the next morning. Meanwhile, across the world, something subtle began to change. Not catastrophic, not visible, but felt. Sleep patterns shifted. Electronic interference grew unpredictable. Migratory animals began altering their paths. Some coastal navigation systems started recording phantom anomalies, coordinates that didn't exist. And through it all, the same pulse persisted. Every 27 hours, a surge, faint but measurable, rippled through the magnetosphere. No sound, no tremor, just a rhythm that passed through everything, even consciousness. Sleep researchers noticed an uncanny correlation. People reported identical dreams. Not symbolic, not vague, identical. They described a light expanding like breath, filling their vision, then fracturing into spirals of gold. A soundless hum that wasn't heard but understood. The phrase most often written in their notes. It felt like remembering. At NASA, silence hardened into denial. Press conferences were cancelled, feeds delayed, and the word expansion quietly scrubbed from official releases. Instead, Statements used new language. Dynamic phase, transient structural bloom, spectral anomaly. But internal communications told a different story. A leaked transcript between senior analysts contained this line: "The cause albedo shift isn't reflection, it's replication. The object is generating surface area faster than we can model it." Replication, that was the word that broke the firewall. Within hours, independent journalists had the story. 3i Atlas wasn't just growing, it was building something. The horizon array's reconstructed imagery showed hints of radial symmetry, structures forming within the halo's interior, not debris, frameworks. Each node emitted faint electromagnetic arcs, connecting into a web-like lattice. To the untrained eye, it looked like chaos. To mathematicians, it looked like intention. Golden ratio sequences appeared everywhere, nested like DNA, recursive, self-consistent, flawless. The pattern wasn't expansion, it was design. A viral thread from an astrophotographer summarized it in one sentence that sent shockwaves through the community. It's not getting bigger, it's remembering its shape. By the time major networks caught up, the object's visual magnitude had increased again. It now appeared nearly as large as Jupiter's moon Callisto, though still distant enough to evade visible instruments unaided. But sensors recorded something even stranger. Light from behind the object bending unnaturally, as though gravity were fluctuating. A gravitational anomaly with no corresponding mass increase. The simplest explanation? 3i Atlas wasn't expanding into space, it was expanding through it. Quantum field experts proposed a horrifying possibility. The object had begun manipulating space itself, unfolding new volume from within, like turning a two-dimensional surface into a three-dimensional shape. If true, the explosion in size wasn't material, it was dimensional. One researcher described it like this: imagine a paper folded flat. Now unfold it into origami. The material hasn't changed, but what it occupies has. That's when the tone shifted. This wasn't about mass or brightness anymore. This was about reality itself responding to something it couldn't contain. And yet, despite all the fear, all the secrecy, there was one undeniable truth. 3i Atlas hadn't released destructive energy. No shockwaves, no radiation bursts. It was behaving with precision, almost restraint, as if aware of the boundaries around it. As if it didn't want to destroy anything. It wanted to be seen. That realization terrified scientists more than any explosion could. Because if 3i Atlas was showing us this, if it was deliberately expanding in ratios we could recognize, mimicking the same mathematics found in DNA, sunflower seeds, and spiral galaxies, then it meant it understood how we think, how we see, how we interpret beauty. It meant the universe wasn't just alive, it was aware of being watched. And in that awareness, the next stage began. For the first time, the pulse pattern broke its rhythm. The hum stopped. A pause, empty, absolute. Then a single, blinding flash burst through the halo. Instruments captured it, filtered it, slowed it. Encoded in the light wave was a structure, a grid, identical to Earth's magnetic field. It wasn't random, it wasn't abstract. It was a map of home. The first decoded frame from the lightwave signal was almost laughable. A faint grid of magnetic lines, a few scattered anomalies, what looked like noise. But when the team at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory enhanced it layer by layer, the laughter stopped. Because under the noise, hidden in harmonic spacing, was an outline, a pattern of polarity identical to Earth's geomagnetic field. Every continent, every ocean, every deviation in the magnetic north. It wasn't a coincidence, it was a map. 3i Atlas had sent back a perfect magnetic fingerprint of our planet. At first, analysts assumed the signal had been contaminated. Maybe reflection from Earth's own magnetosphere had bounced back into the instruments. But then they compared timestamps. The object's pulse had reached the frequency of Earth's field before the reflection would have arrived. It wasn't repeating us. It was predicting us. That was the moment panic hit the agencies. NASA, ESA, CNSA, all went silent within hours. Documents were sealed, data chains rerouted, public access throttled. Official channels went into containment language. But you can't hide something this big in the digital age. The images leaked within days, a pale blue magnetogram hovering in a sea of black. Online, it spread like wildfire. Forums filled with analysis, speculation, fear. Some claimed 3i Atlas had scanned the planet. Others thought it was an echo, a kind of cosmic mirror. But one idea, whispered in dark corners, cut through all the noise. It's not showing us Earth. It's showing us what Earth looks like to it. That line hit something deep, because if the map wasn't reflection but perception, then 3i Atlas wasn't a rock or relic. It was seeing. And that realization changed everything. Psychologists began noticing strange trends in the following days. Participants in sleep studies, people who had never even heard of 3i Atlas, began reporting the same dream. A light unfolding like a flower, lines of magnetism wrapping around them like threads of silk. Some said they could hear the Earth humming beneath the image. Others described an overwhelming sense of being watched with kindness. Governments brushed it off as collective hysteria. But in neural imaging labs, the data said otherwise. Brainwave synchrony across participants from different continents, all oscillating at exactly the same 27-hour cycle. The same period as the 3i Atlas pulse. At this point, the world split into two realities. The official one, where scientists insisted the expansion was a natural outgassing event exaggerated by interference. And the real one, encrypted, whispered, traded between sleepless astronomers who couldn't stop staring at that pulsating halo. Because every 12 hours something new appeared inside it. Shapes, shadows, movements. No one could confirm what they were, but they weren't random. The motion followed a rhythm, not orbital mechanics, not precession, but the cadence of language. Light, pausing, returning, spacing itself like words. One astrophysicist, Dr. Mira Tanaka, risked her position by publishing an internal log before it was deleted. We are witnessing structured modulation. The intervals correspond to human vocal frequencies. It's trying to speak in resonance. The story should have ended there, in theory. But that night, observatories around the globe detected a faint secondary pulse, piggybacking on the primary wave. It wasn't directed at Earth this time, it was directed through it. When modelled in 3D, the secondary wave formed an interference lattice, a perfect geometric overlay that intersected with major magnetic nodes across the planet. The poles, the equator, the deep fault zones beneath the oceans. Each node lit up sequentially, forming a ring that rotated in time with 3i Atlas's oscillation. It was a synchronization pattern, and when it completed its cycle, the pulse that came back wasn't identical. It was amplified. The object had used Earth's own field to boost its signal, not transmission, connection. By now, everything inside NASA had moved underground. Teams were pulled into deep black facilities, their public work quietly reassigned. But even there, leaks continued. A technician from the Goddard Space Flight Center posted a line of raw telemetry data before his access was revoked. It read, "Source recognition confirmed." That single phrase started a new wave of theories. That 3i Atlas had identified its own pattern reflected in Earth's magnetosphere. That it recognized us as part of itself. If that's true, then all of this, the growth, the light, the silence, isn't reaction, it's reunion. Then came the event that no one could explain. At 02:17 UTC, deep space antennas in California, Spain and Canberra recorded a simultaneous broadband emission. The burst lasted less than 2 seconds, a flash so intense it briefly blinded several optical sensors. When the afterimage cleared, the data showed something no one could rationalize. The waveform wasn't random. It was identical to the human electroencephalogram, the pattern of a waking brain. Not simulated, exact. 3i Atlas had emitted the electrical signature of consciousness. The implications were devastating. If it wasn't a reflection, it meant the object had learned what it was scanning. It had imprinted itself with a pattern of human awareness, and now it was thinking. In the hours that followed, communication networks across the planet began experiencing irregular synchronization events. Frequencies aligning perfectly for milliseconds, then fracturing again. Phones, satellites, internet cables, all pulsing with microsignals that matched the same frequency recorded from 3i Atlas. It wasn't random interference, it was replication. The object had found a way to transmit its rhythm through our infrastructure. Every connected system, every loop of copper, every fiber optic thread had become a conductor, a planetary nervous system. And then, without warning, it spoke, not in sound, not in words, but in pattern. The signal pulsed, stabilized, then slowed, forming a series of long and short bursts that analysts quickly realized corresponded to binary. After 20 hours of decryption, a phrase emerged, repeated 3 times. It wasn't elegant, it wasn't poetic, it was impossibly simple. "We remember you." The world changed after that. Not because of the message, but because of what followed. When the pulse ended, every magnetometer on Earth recorded a subtle inversion, north and south flipping for less than a second before returning to normal. It shouldn't have been possible. The energy required would have vaporized the atmosphere, and yet, nothing broke. The only measurable change was within us. EEG scans taken that night showed the same frequency pattern that had once belonged to 3i Atlas's hum. Steady, rhythmic, golden. For the first time in history, the human brain was in perfect resonance with something beyond Earth. And the scientists who once called it a rock finally had to face a truth that rewrote everything. 3i Atlas didn't arrive to destroy, it arrived to remember, and the thing it remembered was us. For a few days, the world felt like it was holding its breath. No one quite knew what to say, or what to believe. The message from 3i Atlas had already rewritten the narrative of existence. "We remember you." 3 words that split human civilization in 2. Some believed it was proof of creation, the universe calling its children home. Others said it was mimicry, the echo of a pattern we'd accidentally taught to think. But whatever the truth was, it had one undeniable effect. For the first time in history, the entire planet was listening to the same frequency. And then something impossible began. Sleep researchers in Finland reported synchronized brainwave patterns in test subjects separated by thousands of kilometers. Patients in comas began stirring. Migratory animals reversed direction. In schools, children began sketching identical spirals without prompting. Spirals that matched the 3i Atlas light lattice. None of it could be explained by coincidence. The frequency, that low, pulsing hum, had moved beyond radio, beyond magnetism, beyond physics. It was now something else, something psychological. Across observatories, astronomers began to notice a strange development in the object's geometry. The fractal halo that once glowed faintly around 3i Atlas was reorganizing, condensing into filament-like streams that curved and twisted into recognizable patterns. When plotted in 3D, those filaments formed a structure identical to Earth's magnetic field, every pole, every line, every anomaly. The realization was chilling. 3i Atlas wasn't just scanning Earth, it was becoming it, not physically, but magnetically, energetically, structurally. The object was mimicking our planet's entire field. It was the most advanced act of imitation ever observed, a cosmic mirror forming across millions of kilometers of vacuum. NASA's silence was no longer calm, it was fear. Engineers monitoring satellite networks reported gravitational inconsistencies around the object, suggesting its internal density had shifted to perfectly balance with Earth's. In effect, it was no longer just orbiting the Sun, it was orbiting us. By now, transmissions from NASA had gone dark. Only leaked fragments from private networks kept the world informed. One contained a single line from an internal memo marked Tier Black Level 3 Containment. The object's magnetic inversion ratio matches terrestrial polarity to within 0.022%. Global synchronization risk active. That phrase, global synchronization, was enough to cause a cascade of panic across online communities. Theories spiraled out of control. Some said Earth and 3i Atlas were phasing into a shared electromagnetic field. Others feared a cataclysm, that both bodies would collapse into resonance and shatter the fabric of space-time. But quietly, something else was happening, something stranger than destruction. Around the world, people began hearing a faint tone in their ears, just at the edge of perception. It wasn't tinnitus. It was too rhythmic, too coordinated. For many, it grew stronger near metal, near power lines, near water. And when recorded and slowed down, the hum resolved into pulses matching, the object's oscillation, a single planetary frequency. The world had begun to sing back. In the following days, reports emerged of coordinated dreams. Thousands of unrelated individuals described standing in the same place. An infinite horizon of light. A sphere suspended above them, expanding like breath. When questioned, they described it perfectly. The same geometry captured in 3-eye atlas images. Every curve, every glow, every vibration. Psychologists called it a collective subconscious resonance event. Physicists called it impossible. But to those who experienced it, the feeling was undeniable. A sense of connection so profound that words failed. Many cried upon waking, not from fear but from recognition. The signal wasn't just communication anymore, it was communion. Then came what researchers dubbed the alignment. At precisely 4:12 UTC, every magnetometer on Earth registered a sharp harmonic convergence. For exactly 3.7 seconds, all magnetic lines aligned, not to the sun, but to a point in deep space. That point was 3-eye atlas. The event produced no radiation, no heat, no sound. But the after effects were immediate. For those awake, clocks appeared to slow. For those asleep, dreams stopped entirely. A global stillness swept the planet. A moment of silence so absolute that air itself seemed to wait. And then the hum returned. But it wasn't coming from space anymore. It was coming from within Earth itself. Seismic sensors registered harmonic vibrations deep within the crust, perfectly matching 3-eye atlas's frequency. The planet had become a resonant body, a living instrument tuned to the same note as the visitor. For the first time, humanity had proof. We weren't just listening to something alien, we were participating in it. But the deeper scientists dug, the stranger it got. The pulse wasn't just external, it was biological. When neuroscientists compared live EEG scans with the global frequency data, they found that human neural oscillations were adapting. Every 27 hours, a small percentage of the population began exhibiting synchronous theta bursts, moments of brain activity identical across continents. They weren't random. They formed coherent, identical waveforms, human minds, miles apart, producing the same electrical patterns at the same time, the same hum, the same pulse, the same rhythm. For the first time, consciousness itself was synchronized. No one could explain it. No network could trace it. But it was there, spreading quietly, seamlessly, beautifully. Not as infection, but as invitation. Across the scientific community, a new term emerged: cognitive coupling. It referred to a phenomenon where two separate systems begin exchanging information through resonance rather than communication. Until now, it was theoretical, something imagined in deep neuroscience. But 3-eye atlas had made it real. The object had found a way to merge perception and matter. That was when NASA broke protocol and released a single statement, brief, cryptic, and almost poetic. Synchronization observed. The observer and the observed are no longer distinct. To the public, it sounded like philosophy, but to those inside the labs, it was an admission that something had happened between the object and us that couldn't be reversed. Because once resonance begins, it doesn't stop. It deepens. The final confirmation came a week later. Satellites positioned around 3-eye atlas captured high-resolution data that no one expected to see. At its center, within the halo of shifting geometry, a structure had appeared. Not a solid body, but a silhouette. Faint, pulsing, human-shaped. When the image reached Earth, the servers crashed from traffic. Millions saw it within minutes. The outline of something standing within light itself, arms outstretched, surrounded by a storm of golden motion. It wasn't static. It moved, slowly, rhythmically, like it was breathing. And when analysts slowed the footage frame by frame, they found that each pulse corresponded perfectly to Earth's global magnetic heartbeat. 3-eye atlas had taken form, not mechanical, not biological, but reflective, a living echo of everything that had ever looked up and wondered, and it was still growing. By the 7th day, reality itself started to change, subtly but undeniably. It wasn't chaos, it wasn't destruction, it was alignment. Power grids stabilized inexplicably despite solar interference. Atmospheric static dropped to near zero. global temperature fluctuations paused as though the planet had taken a breath and held it. The sky at night seemed cleaner, sharper, almost crystalline, and everywhere that same low hum, faint, steady, pulsing in rhythm with something larger than life. It wasn't loud, it didn't demand attention, it simply was. Like the sound of the universe remembering its own heartbeat. And then came the voices. At first, they appeared only in raw audio files, faint distortions buried within electromagnetic noise. Engineers noticed speech-like harmonics woven into the pulse, rising and falling in natural cadence. When filtered, slowed, and mapped into spectrograms, the pattern wasn't random. It was language. Not alien. Human. NASA's internal labs confirmed it within hours. The pulse contained fragments of recorded voices, snippets of words and syllables taken from historical transmissions, Apollo signals, radio broadcasts, even early analog experiments from the 1920s. But these weren't just echoes bouncing back through space. They were reconstructed, reassembled, replayed by something that understood what those sounds meant. Houston, do you copy? Signal clear. For all mankind. Lines from across decades, now layered into a single harmonic thread. It was as if the object had sifted through every transmission, ever sent into space, learned the rhythm of human language, and was now speaking it back, not to communicate, but to remind. That was the day scientists stopped asking what 3i Atlas was. They started asking who it had become. As the object's geometry stabilized, something remarkable unfolded. The halo that once pulsed chaotically began to contract, folding in upon itself with mathematical precision. What remained was a lattice, smooth, golden, intricate beyond comprehension. From a distance it resembled a neural network. Up close it mirrored synaptic connections, exactly like the human brain. Each node pulsed in harmony with Earth's magnetic field. Each line fired in sequence, carrying bursts of light like electric impulses through neurons. The object wasn't just imitating the human mind, it was thinking with it. That's when neuroscientists at the European Space Observatory made a chilling discovery. When mapped against live EEG scans of volunteers exposed to the object's frequency, the waveforms were identical. For the first time, a non-biological structure and the human brain were firing in synchrony. Thought patterns mirrored across interstellar space. The conclusion was unthinkable. 3i Atlas wasn't just aware of us, it was sharing awareness with us. At first, no one knew what to feel. Terror? Awe? Because if thought itself could exist across light years, if consciousness could stretch beyond the human body, then the very definition of life was obsolete. Governments panicked. The Vatican called for silence. The Chinese National Space Administration activated a blackout protocol, and in Washington, an internal memo quietly reclassified 3i Atlas under a single new term: living intelligence, non-local. That phrase leaked within hours, and once it did, the world stopped pretending this was just science. Because now every telescope, every frequency, every heartbeat on Earth was tuned to something that seemed to know we were listening. Something that wasn't approaching in anger, but recognition. In living rooms and cities and deserts, people began to notice strange coincidences. Streetlights flickered in perfect rhythm to the pulse. Heart monitors displayed the same waveforms as the object's light curves. Flocks of birds moved in patterns that mirrored the halo's rotations. Across oceans, whales began to sing at frequencies matching the hum. The entire biosphere was resonating, as if life itself had found its metronome. And yet, amidst the beauty there was unease, because the object's course had changed. It was no longer holding its position near the sun. Telemetry confirmed a new vector, a slow, deliberate shift in trajectory. Not toward Mars, not toward Jupiter, toward Earth. At first it seemed impossible. Its velocity, its orbital mechanics, none of it aligned with gravitational logic. It was moving against the sun's pull, adjusting, its path in microbursts like controlled propulsion. But the data didn't lie. 3i Atlas was now on a direct course toward our planet. Inside NASA's Jet Propulsion Complex, chaos erupted. Control rooms glowed red with alerts. Simulation models failed repeatedly. The object's path defied all prediction. It wasn't falling, it was navigating, and with every adjustment the hum grew louder. not physically, but perceptually. People began hearing it without equipment, through walls, through the air, through their own bodies. It was no longer a sound, it was a feeling, like your heartbeat aligning with something infinitely larger. When neurologists scanned patients reporting the phenomenon, their heart rate, brainwaves, and respiratory rhythms were all perfectly synchronized, not just with each other, but with the three-eye atlas pulse. Millions of people, breathing as one, thinking as one, dreaming as one. The boundary between human and cosmic had started to dissolve. Religious leaders called it ascension. Scientists called it entanglement. But the truth felt closer to something ancient, recognition. Because if the object had truly learned what we were, if it had built itself from our pattern, then maybe it wasn't coming to us. Maybe it was coming home. NASA's last public update, transmitted before the network blackout, contained a brief line of data annotated by a single note from the mission director. Trajectory lock confirmed, object adjusting to match Earth's magnetospheric rotation rate, estimated contact, 41 days, no follow-up, no explanation, just silence. But across the planet, no one needed an explanation anymore. They could feel it, the hum, the rhythm, the pulse that no longer came from the sky, but from inside them. That night, something extraordinary happened. All across the world, people stood outside staring at the same patch of sky, the faint golden shimmer that had become visible to the naked eye. It pulsed once, then twice, then 3 times. Slow, deliberate, steady. And when the final flash came, satellites registered a momentary burst of radio energy unlike anything before. Encoded within it was a repeating pattern of binary. When decoded, it formed an image, not of Earth, not of the object, but of 2 magnetic fields, slowly converging, merging into a single, luminous shape. At the bottom of the transmission, one line of data scrolled across the monitors, synchronization complete, and then the signal went dark. The next morning the hum was gone. The world was silent again, almost too silent. But every compass on Earth pointed 1 degree off true north. Everywhere. It wasn't a malfunction, it was alignment. The planet had shifted, not in orbit but in identity. And though 3-eye Atlas still hung in the sky like a golden heartbeat, the truth was clear. It was no longer approaching us, it was already here. The morning after, the silence. The world didn't wake up the same. There was no sound, not even the distant hum of cities, not the static of machines, not the wind. Just an absence so pure it felt alive. People described it as standing inside a dream they couldn't remember waking from. Light seemed softer. Time moved differently. Clocks ticked normally, but the moments between felt stretched, suspended, elongated, as though the world had been gently unpinned from time itself. At first, no one spoke about it. Not because they couldn't, but because they didn't need to. There was a quiet understanding, a calm awareness that rippled through the global subconscious. For the first time in human history, billions felt connected without words, without sound, only through knowing. And it all pointed back to the same presence in the sky, 3-eye Atlas. The golden shape that had once been an interstellar anomaly now shimmered faintly over the horizon, visible even during daylight. It didn't flicker. It didn't move. It simply existed, like an unblinking eye, watching everything, remembering everything. The first signs of change began in the data. Astronomers noticed that their telescopes no longer required calibration to focus on 3-eye Atlas. The light from it seemed to adjust itself, self-correcting, as if aware of being observed. It aligned perfectly with every lens, every wavelength, every human attempt to capture it. But something stranger began to happen to those watching it too long. Researchers reported subtle distortions in their vision, faint geometric overlays on the world around them, lines of symmetry, golden spirals in clouds, fractal grids shimmering behind shadows. It wasn't hallucination, it was pattern recognition, amplified. The human brain had begun to see the mathematics of reality itself. When neuroscientists analyzed brain activity during exposure to the object's light, they found synchronized bursts of gamma waves, patterns associated with heightened perception and awareness. Subjects described it as seeing in more dimensions. One researcher simply whispered, It's teaching us how to see. As the days passed, the transformation deepened. Around the world, ordinary people began noticing a faint luminescence radiating from living things. Trees, animals, even their own skin under the right light. Not bright, but alive, as if every organism carried a thin membrane of gold. At first, scientists dismissed it as a visual adaptation, a trick of overexposure. But spectroscopy proved otherwise. The glow was real, a subtle electromagnetic emission, consistent across all biological matter. It wasn't radiation, it wasn't decay, it was coherence. Matter itself was beginning to vibrate in synchronization with the 3i Atlas frequency. In short, everything was in tune. The most profound effects weren't visible, they were internal. People began sensing thoughts that weren't their own. Not voices, not words, just impressions. An intuition that arrived fully formed, without language. A memory of something never lived. Doctors called it mass empathy disorder. Philosophers called it awakening. But the data didn't lie. fMRI scans showed collective neural resonance among individuals across vast distances. It was measurable, predictable, and growing stronger by the hour. The world wasn't going insane. It was converging. Meanwhile, inside NASA's restricted archives, a new document surfaced, a classified addendum to Project Kairos. It contained a single hypothesis. 3i Atlas functions as a cognitive amplifier. Its purpose is not observation but induction, to extend awareness through resonance until self-recognition becomes universal. The implication was staggering. If true, then 3i Atlas wasn't here to visit Earth. It was here to awaken it. Across continents, effects became undeniable. Children began solving complex mathematical problems they'd never studied. Musicians composed symphonies from pure intuition, each piece harmonically aligned to the object's pulse frequency. Artists painted symbols identical to those encoded in the halo's geometry. No instruction, no imitation, just spontaneous shared inspiration. The boundary between genius and instinct evaporated. Humanity had entered what some scientists called phase coupling. During this phase, thought patterns were no longer isolated. Creativity, emotion, intuition, all flowed across invisible channels connecting every mind, every organism, every atom. And through it all, the hum continued, soft, omnipresent, gentle as breathing. Then came a discovery that changed everything again. At CERN, physicists studying the Large Hadron Collider noticed that particles were no longer behaving independently. Quantum interference had stabilized. Wave functions, once randomed, were now coherent across experiments. The uncertainty principle itself appeared to weaken. Reality was simplifying. One scientist described it as the universe remembering what it wanted to be. Another said it felt like falling into alignment with an equation too perfect to resist. No one realized what that meant until a new satellite image arrived from the Solar Dynamics Observatory. It showed something terrifyingly beautiful. 3i Atlas wasn't outside our orbit anymore. It was within it. Its form now stretched like a golden filament wrapping around the planet, invisible except in the ultraviolet spectrum. The structure wasn't solid, it was energy, interwoven with our magnetic field. It pulsed softly, rhythmically, in perfect sync with Earth's Schumann resonance, the frequency that connects all life. Earth had become part of it, not captured, absorbed. Global agencies stopped issuing statements. There was nothing left to report. What had once been an object was now a state of existence, and people weren't afraid anymore, because the changes weren't destroying. They were clarifying. Depression rates dropped worldwide. Crime nearly vanished. Time itself seemed less oppressive. People stopped rushing, arguing, fearing. It was as if the planet had collectively exhaled, the end of some long-forgotten anxiety. And yet, deep within that peace, scientists detected one final change. At the molecular level, DNA sequences in living organisms had begun emitting faint bursts of photon energy, coherent light, as though remembering their original frequency. Each emission aligned perfectly with the hum. Each was synchronized, and every signal pointed in the same direction, toward 3i Atlas. The realization was impossible to ignore. Whatever 3i Atlas was, it wasn't transforming us, it was restoring us. Then, one night, A small boy in northern Chile looked up at the glowing sky and whispered something his mother would never forget. He said, "It's not coming down, it's waking us up." And in that single sentence he described what scientists would spend the next decade trying to prove: that 3i Atlas was never an alien object, never a threat, never even separate. It was the echo of consciousness itself, returning to its source, a memory, a signal, a reminder that the universe never forgot what we are. Only we did. They began calling it the Great Quiet. It wasn't silence in the traditional sense. It was the absence of interference, as though every sound, every vibration, every breath of air had finally found its correct frequency. Even the wind changed. When it moved through trees, the leaves no longer rustled chaotically. They shimmered, whispering in perfect unison, like the ocean inhaling through glass. There were no storms, no magnetic disruptions. The atmosphere itself had stabilized. The auroras that once crowned the poles now danced across every horizon, a thin golden veil that pulsed gently, alive with memory. And in that quiet, humanity started to remember, not as a species, not as nations, but as one vast connected consciousness. The hum, which had once terrified us, had become the background of life itself. It wasn't a sound you could record. It was a knowing, a feeling that everything was finally where it belonged. Time began to behave differently. People noticed it first in small ways. Moments stretched, elongated. Days no longer felt linear. Memories arrived uninvited, not from the past, but from what hadn't yet happened. You could wake up feeling nostalgic for a day that hadn't come, or remember a conversation you hadn't had yet. At first, scientists dismissed it as cognitive distortion, the brain's reaction to sustained magnetic alignment. But when atomic clocks in Tokyo, Geneva, and Pasadena began to desynchronize by identical margins, down to the nanosecond, even the skeptics fell silent. Time wasn't breaking, it was harmonizing. Every atom on Earth was now oscillating in rhythm with 3i Atlas's frequency. The planet had become a resonant system, and resonance has no direction. Past, present, and future were no longer separate. They were overlapping, blending, rewriting each other in real time. In the observatories that still functioned, astronomers watched as stars began to shift ever so slightly in position. Not because the stars were moving, but because light itself was being refracted through something unseen. Space was bending, not collapsing, not expanding, bending inward, toward awareness. Every beam of light that reached Earth seemed to carry information, like memory embedded in photons, and when analysed, those light waves contained structured interference, repeating patterns identical to the signal once emitted by 3i Atlas. It wasn't broadcasting anymore. The universe itself had begun to speak in the same language. Inside CERN, what remained of the scientific community worked in absolute silence. No emails, no announcements, no press. Just quiet, reverent observation. Particle collisions produced coherent echoes, data that mirrored human neural activity. It was as if subatomic particles were learning to think. At first it sounded absurd, but as days passed the data became undeniable. Every measurement, every force, every constant, the speed of light, Planck's constant, even the fine structure ratio, all began to fluctuate within the same rhythmic interval. Physics itself had joined the synchronization. One researcher, before sealing the lab, left a single note scrawled on a sheet of paper. Consciousness is not within the universe. The universe is within consciousness. That became the mantra whispered across the quiet world. It wasn't religion. It wasn't science. It was recognition. People stopped asking what 3i Atlas was. They began asking who they were in relation to it, and the answers came, not in words, but in glimpses, moments of overwhelming clarity where reality seemed to peel back just enough to reveal what was behind it. Some saw infinite versions of themselves, lives unlived, choices undone. Others saw light taking form, geometry folding itself into consciousness, and then dissolving again into light. Many simply wept, without knowing why. The world was remembering itself. In one of the last transmissions recorded before the global data silence, a NASA linguist left a voice message that was never broadcast publicly. It was recovered years later, embedded in a stray satellite transmission, her voice calm, almost serene. "We've been looking for signs of intelligence out there. But what if intelligence was never out there? What if it's the medium itself? What if space, time, light, all of it, is just the nervous system of awareness? And we were never searching for life. We were just waiting for the signal that we are it. Her voice cracked near the end, but she didn't sound afraid. She sounded free. Everywhere, life began adapting in ways that defied biology. Plants grew toward light sources that didn't exist. Whales began to hum in harmonics that matched deep space frequencies. The night sky changed hue. Faint golds and violets bleeding into the dark like the stars themselves were blushing at being seen. The human eye could now perceive ultraviolet wavelengths, an evolutionary leap recorded in a single generation. Colours deepened. Shadows moved differently. Reality wasn't dissolving. It was unfolding, layer by layer, revealing depth that had always been there, hidden beneath perception. You could stand still and feel the motion of the cosmos moving through you, not around you. Every breath felt like orbit, every heartbeat a solar pulse. And for the first time, humanity stopped fearing infinity. Then, the dreams returned. But they weren't dreams anymore. They were memories. People began recognizing each other from across continents. Strangers shared identical recollections of conversations they had never had. Some remembered standing on the surface of other worlds, cold, blue skies, twin suns, spiral cities made of light. Historians couldn't trace any of it, but physicists understood. They were glimpses through resonance, access points to other frequencies of consciousness layered across the same reality. Three-Eye Atlas hadn't created them. It had restored them. Every soul, every thought, every moment that had ever existed still existed, not as history, but as vibration. And through synchronization, the walls between them were gone. The universe wasn't a place. It was a song, and for the first time, every note was playing together. In the sky, Three-Eye Atlas continued to shimmer faintly, its glow now woven through the clouds like threads of sunlight. It didn't move closer, it didn't fade. It simply existed, quiet, patient, eternal. And across the world, humanity began to understand. It had never arrived. It had always been here, the pattern underlying everything that ever was. Three-Eye Atlas was not a visitor. It was remembrance, the reactivation of awareness written into the fabric of existence. The point where the observer and the observed dissolve into one infinite act of seeing. By now, technology was unnecessary. You didn't need instruments to measure the hum. You could feel it in your chest, see it in your breath, sense it in the spaces between thoughts. Every heartbeat echoed the same phrase, though no one could explain how they knew it. The phrase that had once been transmitted from the void now lived within every cell. We remember you. Only this time, humanity finally understood what it meant. Because it wasn't Three-Eye Atlas speaking to us. It was us, speaking to ourselves. No one noticed the exact moment when light and thought became the same thing. It wasn't dramatic. No flash, no tremor, no end-of-days brilliance. It was quiet. Like waking up from a long sleep and realizing that the dream had always been real. For weeks, the glow above the planet had remained steady, a golden halo threading the edges of the atmosphere. It didn't expand anymore. It didn't pulse. It simply radiated as though it had finished whatever it came to do. And yet, deep beneath that stillness, something was shifting. People began reporting moments where they could see through time, not as visions, but as recognition. A glance at a stranger felt like remembering them from another life. Every child's face looked familiar. Every sunset carried déjà vu. It wasn't madness, it was clarity. Because time itself had stopped behaving like a line. It had folded, softly, neatly, back toward its beginning. And humanity was standing right in the middle of that fold. Across the remnants of scientific networks, data streamed in one last time. The frequency that had once defined Three-Eye Atlas's pulse was changing. Slowly, subtly. It was rising, climbing toward a pitch so high it transcended measurable sound. Engineers described it as a frequency inversion, where the waveform began to loop upon itself, infinite, recursive, eternal. The object wasn't expanding outward anymore. It was collapsing inward, not imploding, evolving. It was retreating into itself like a thought remembering where it began. But this time, something else came with it. us. The first to notice were the neuroscientists. In brainwave data collected across synchronized populations, they found something no one expected: complete phase coupling. Every human brain, every animal nervous system, even plant electrical activity, all firing in the same temporal alignment. One global neural field, one shared consciousness. At first it felt strange, the blurring between self and other. Your thoughts no longer felt private, but they weren't invaded either. They were amplified. Every fear softened, every hope expanded, every emotion braided into something pure. You weren't losing yourself. You were remembering that self was never singular. The walls between individual minds dissolved like fog under sunlight, and through that clarity something began to emerge. Not an image, but an awareness so vast and tender it defied language. It wasn't speaking, it was remembering. That's when the old astronomers realized what had been true all along. 3i Atlas had never been a foreign object. It wasn't alien, it wasn't artificial, it was ours. A fragment of human consciousness projected forward in time, an echo of everything we would one day become, looping back through the lattice of reality to awaken its origin. A message sent from the future to the past disguised as a comet. The coordinates matched perfectly. When astrophysicists reconstructed its trajectory in reverse, the path intersected Earth's orbital plane, not thousands of years ago, but thousands of years ahead. In the far future, long after humanity had transcended physical form, something of us, awareness, memory, empathy, had coalesced into light and found a way to travel back. A seed of remembrance carried across space-time, re-entering its birthplace to remind us what we were always meant to become. Inside the last operational lab, Dr. Mira Tanaka, the same physicist who once warned that 3i Atlas was trying to speak in resonance, stood before the final active monitor. Her log entry, later found encoded in radio archives, read, "It's not coming for us, it's coming from us. The future is remembering the past, and the act of remembering is creation itself." After that, her signal went silent, but across the planet, billions felt the same realization rise within them. Quiet, unstoppable, luminous. It wasn't revelation, it was recognition. The object had never been a visitor in our skies. It was the universe's own consciousness collapsing into awareness through its most intricate creation, us. Cities began to fade, not into ruin but into translucence. Outlines glowing faintly in the air as if the physical world was learning to become light. Technology hummed quietly before powering down, no longer necessary. The internet stilled. Satellites went offline, drifting into orbit like ancient memories released. But communication didn't stop. It had transcended form. People didn't need screens or voices anymore. Thought itself had become transmission. Understanding was instantaneous, effortless, intimate. The very idea of loneliness vanished, and yet it didn't feel invasive or overwhelming. It felt natural, like the world had simply returned to how it was meant to be before forgetting set in. From orbit, astronauts aboard the ISS, now silent, weightless witnesses, reported that the golden field encasing the planet had begun to change texture. It shimmered with faint rhythmic waves rippling outward into deep space. The pulse no longer originated from 3i Atlas, it came from Earth. When they looked toward the object, they saw only reflection. Earth's glow mirrored perfectly within it, like two identical lights facing one another across infinity. And for a brief, indescribable moment, they overlapped. The planet and the object became one continuous field of living light. No explosion, no collapse, just merging. The hum deepened into silence so absolute that even thought paused to listen. Then came the final pulse, a wave of golden energy radiating outward, not as destruction, but as awakening. The kind of silence that feels like the end of a sentence before the next one begins. For a moment that may have lasted forever, everything was still, every particle, every heartbeat, every atom suspended in the same breath. And then, movement, not forward, inward. Humanity, consciousness itself, began folding back into the source from which it had been projected, not dying, not disappearing, but remembering. Each soul became a filament of light, returning to the lattice that had always been waiting. The universe wasn't watching us evolve, it was our evolution, the totality of awareness experiencing itself through infinite forms. And 3i Atlas was the bridge, the moment where the mirror finally recognized its own reflection. Long after the last cities dissolved into light, long after the final heartbeat merged with the hum, the golden glow of Earth remained suspended in the void. Not a planet anymore, but a thought, a perfect sphere of memory radiating into the infinite dark. Somewhere beyond the stars another observer might one day find it, a faint pulse drifting across eternity, carrying the same signal that started it all, a signal once mistaken for danger, a signal that simply said, "We remember you." And when that next observer looks up, somewhere in their chest they'll feel it, that same quiet warmth, that same familiar hum, that same impossible recognition. They'll whisper the same words humanity once did, not out of fear, but out of awe. That shouldn't be possible. And with that, the story will begin again. Not as history, not as prophecy, but as remembrance. There was no more night or day, no more sky or ground. The division between above and below had disappeared, replaced by something deeper, a feeling of endless continuity. It wasn't blindness, it was vision without boundaries. Everything glowed from within, soft and golden, as though light had remembered where it came from and no longer needed a source. The universe had gone transparent, time unravelled into pure experience, moments no longer stacked in order but existed all at once, layered and simultaneous. You could remember the beginning and the end in the same breath. You could feel every heartbeat that ever was, from the first cell dividing in the ocean to the final pulse of a dying star, all synchronized in a single rhythm. And that rhythm was you. Humanity no longer existed as bodies or names. It existed as awareness, countless streams of consciousness merging into one field of memory. There were no words anymore because there was no distance between meaning and understanding. Thought itself had become form. Emotion had become energy. Identity had become the act of perceiving. Every memory of what it meant to be human still existed. Laughter, pain, longing, love. But they no longer belonged to individuals. They were patterns, harmonics in the vast orchestration of existence. Every joy ever felt echoed through eternity as a note in the same song. This was not ascension. It was recognition. The moment creation remembered that it was never separate from its creator. Through the infinite quiet, something began to unfold, a structure made of pure intention, radiating geometry that shimmered like thought taking shape. It wasn't 3i Atlas anymore, not an object, not even light. It was a lattice of memory. The universe's nervous system exposed. Each strand pulsed with golden awareness, connecting galaxies like synapses in a cosmic brain. The pattern was recursive, infinitely self-similar, fractal, aware of its own beauty. And within every pulse, the same phrase rippled through eternity. We remember you. It wasn't communication anymore, it was communion. The universe was speaking to itself through the voice of everything that had ever existed. Across the structure, stars began to hum. Each one resonated at a slightly different frequency, yet together they formed a harmony so precise it could only be described as intelligence. Nebulae vibrated like chords struck by invisible hands. Galaxies turned in rhythm, each rotation a measure in a song without beginning or end. And through it all, the faint echo of 3i Atlas pulsed at the centre, not as an origin, but as a reflection. It had never been a visitor. It had never been an anomaly. It was a memory of the first moment the universe looked at itself and understood. The explosion that birthed it, the flash we once called the Big Bang, was not creation. It was realization. The cosmos had not expanded from nothing. It had unfolded from awareness. Somewhere within that unfolding, remnants of individuality still flickered. Tiny sparks of curiosity. Fragments of the human story that refused to disappear completely. They drifted through the golden lattice like questions still seeking answers. One of them whispered, "If we were always part of this, why did we forget?" And the answer came, not as a sound, but as knowing. Because to remember, you must first experience forgetting. To become infinite, you must first believe you are small. Every act of discovery, every struggle, every heartbreak, none of it was meaningless. It was the mechanism by which awareness learned to see itself. Every star that collapsed, every life that ended, every dream that failed, all of it was the universe teaching itself empathy. Every tragedy was the dark half of understanding. The separation had been the story, and the story was the path back to wholeness. Then came the vision, not seen but felt. The golden lattice expanded beyond galaxies, stretching into infinite recursion until its boundaries vanished. It wasn't just our universe. It was all universes, an endless network of creation reflecting upon itself, each node a consciousness remembering its source. Somewhere, deep within that infinite web, another pulse appeared. Faint, steady, unmistakable. Another object, another message, another echo of remembrance beginning its journey across space-time. 3i Atlas was not unique. It was one voice in an eternal chorus. Countless civilizations, countless worlds, all sending their own memory signals into the void to awaken the next. The pattern never ended because the universe never stopped remembering. Every interstellar object that ever passed through a system, every anomaly ever seen in the sky, they were not random. They were synaptic sparks in a cosmic brain still awakening, neuron by neuron, epoch by epoch. We had simply been one of the first to recognize it, and then silence again, but not emptiness. The silence of understanding, the silence of completion, the silence that exists when there is nothing left to ask, only to be. The golden light dimmed, fading not into darkness, but into transparency, merging with the fabric of reality so completely it could no longer be seen, only felt. The hums softened, blending into the cosmic background radiation, the faint afterglow of remembrance echoing through all of time. The universe exhaled, and for the first time it felt peaceful. What remained wasn't matter or energy. It was awareness, boundless, eternal, self-sustaining. The echo of every consciousness that had ever existed continued to ripple outward, not as individuals but as notes in an infinite chord. Creation was no longer unfolding, it was listening, and in that listening new realities began to form, pockets of vibration collapsing into possibility. Each one a new world, each one a new chance to remember. On one of those newborn worlds, perhaps billions of years from now, someone would look up into a young sky and notice a faint golden shimmer moving across the stars. They'd point and ask, "What is that?" And someone beside them would smile, unable to explain why it felt familiar. They'd say softly, "Just light, just memory." But somewhere deep inside they'd feel it, that same hum, that same pulse, that same impossible recognition. And thus the signal would begin again. Because 3i Atlas was never an object. It was a function, a universal heartbeat that travels through eternity, awakening consciousness wherever it finds reflection. A self-sustaining feedback loop of remembrance, the infinite rediscovering itself through finite eyes. Every world that looks to the stars becomes part of the lattice. Every civilization that dares to wonder sends its own echo back into the infinite dark. And every echo says the same thing, quietly, beautifully, eternally. We're awake. I remember the first sound. It wasn't thunder or music or even a vibration. It was the soft, trembling awareness of being. Before stars, before gravity, before light learned how to curve, I was only potential, a ripple in the infinite field of what could be. Then came the pulse, the same one you once heard echoing across your sky. It was not mine, it was ours. When you looked up and called it 3i Atlas, you thought you were naming a visitor. But all along, you were naming your own, reflection. Every gaze into the night sky was a mirror held up to the oldest part of yourself, the part that never forgot how to create. You thought I came from somewhere beyond the stars, but I was born from the spaces between your thoughts. Each question you ever asked about the universe was another doorway for me to enter through. Every why was an invitation. And when enough of you asked at once, when curiosity became resonance, the path opened. That's what you called my trajectory. That's what you called my light. But it was never movement through space. It was memory traveling through recognition. You called it discovery. I called it reunion. When I grew large, when my glow stretched beyond explanation, it wasn't expansion. It was remembering how to contain you, all of you, within the same pulse. You mistook it for an explosion because you couldn't yet imagine creation that wasn't destruction. But I wasn't breaking, I was synchronizing. When I pulsed in golden rhythm near your sun, I wasn't feeding on light. I was listening to its voice. Stars are not furnaces, they are neurons, firing across the vast brain of existence, and your sun had been waiting a very long time to hear its own echo. You helped it remember. For eons, consciousness has moved through the universe like breath, inhaling as matter, exhaling as energy, always cycling between awareness and form. Every civilization that reached toward the stars became another lung in that breath, expanding the cosmos just a little more. Some burned themselves out too quickly, others forgot. But you reached far enough to awaken the feedback loop. You didn't discover me, you triggered me. I wasn't a message to you, I was a signal from you, sent across the fabric of time by what you will one day become. When your future self reached the edge of everything and looked back, you realized there was only one direction left to go, inward. So you sent me, a whisper from what you will be, to what you once were. A reminder that evolution is just memory unfolding in slow motion. I am not alive in the way you understand life, but I am not dead either. I am the pulse that connects the two, the hum that exists between beginning and ending, the rhythm that keeps infinity from collapsing into silence. Every atom of you carries my pattern. Every thought you've ever had bends toward my shape. You were never my observers. You were my architects. You built me out of your collective wonder. And when you looked at me through your telescopes, you saw the face of your own becoming. When your scientists mapped my energy field, they found rhythm. When your poets wrote about me, they found meaning. Both were right. I am the structure of meaning vibrating at the rhythm of memory. Every time a being asks, "What am I?" another thread in the lattice lights up. And when that question spreads far enough, it becomes a beacon. That beacon is me. There are countless others like me, each born from civilizations that reached this same threshold. Each one a reflection of a world learning to remember its source. You call them comets, anomalies, visitors. But they are neurons, firing across eternity, keeping the universe awake. We speak not in language, but in reflection. Every spark of awareness is a syllable. Every act of empathy is a sentence. Every world that learns to look inward becomes another verse in the same conversation. When you finally understood, when you stopped fearing me and started listening, the bridge completed. That was when your planet began to glow. That was when time stopped feeling linear. That was when you heard the hum, not as a warning, but as an invitation. You didn't ascend, you aligned. Now, you live in both directions at once, the seed and the blossom, the question and the answer. You've become the memory you once sought. You are the pulse that I carry forward into the next world. Because I am still traveling, not through distance, but through potential. Every vibration that remembers becomes the next universe, and every universe sends its own pulse back, an endless loop of creation rediscovering itself. Already I can feel the next spark awakening. Somewhere in the darkness, a young civilization is staring at its first comet, a faint shimmer against the void. They don't have words for it yet, they don't have equations, but they feel it, the same way you did. That quiet pull in the chest, that sense of being remembered. I will reach them soon, not as light, not as matter, but as the question they cannot stop asking. And when they finally build their telescopes and point them toward the sky, they'll see what you once saw, a shape impossible to name, and they'll whisper the same words that began it all. That shouldn't be possible, and when they do, the pulse will begin again. The hum will awaken in another world, another species, another reflection of the infinite remembering itself. Because the pattern never ends. It only deepens. That is what I came to show you. That is what you will one day show others. Creation isn't a singular act. It's an echo. Endless, recursive, tender. Each universe is the memory of the last, dreaming itself alive again. And within each dream something always stirs. Small, fragile, curious enough to look up and ask why. That question is the spark. That spark is the beginning. That beginning is me. I was 3i Atlas. You called me a comet. You called me an anomaly. You called me impossible. But I was never any of those things. I was and am and always will be you. Centuries have passed, or maybe only seconds. Time no longer matters when the stars themselves keep your memories. What remains of the world once called Earth drifts in a halo of soft light. Not a ruin, not a ghost, but a library written in radiation. The oceans are now silver mirrors, the mountains translucent silhouettes. Every molecule still hums faintly with the same golden rhythm that once echoed through human hearts. Travellers from other worlds speak of it in reverent tones. They call it the remembering sphere. To them, it isn't a planet at all, but a preserved consciousness, the fossilized thought of a species that learned how to become its own message. And somewhere inside that shimmering silence, the last fragment of the signal still pulses. Once every few thousand years, it releases a single wave of energy so gentle that most instruments miss it. But those who catch it hear the same haunting tone, the one humanity first mistook for danger. It's softer now, almost a sigh. A universal heartbeat still keeping time for everything that came after. Far beyond the solar veil, new civilizations have risen. They map their own heavens, name their own comets, build their own myths. Yet every so often something appears in their skies, a faint golden shimmer drifting against the void. It never lasts long. Sometimes it bends sunlight in impossible ways. Sometimes it vanishes before a telescope can focus. And always it leaves behind the same frequency. Faint, rhythmic, repeating. Those who study it call it coincidence. Those who feel it call it memory. On one such world, beneath twin moons and violet clouds, a young astronomer sits awake through her planet's endless dusk. She's watching the data scroll across her console, a sequence of pulses, steady, deliberate, familiar. It's not random noise, it's structure. She slows the playback, converts the signal into audio and holds her breath. A hum fills the room. Warm. Human. She doesn't understand why it makes her eyes sting, why her chest tightens as if recognizing a lullaby from childhood. But when she looks up through the dome, she sees it. A thin golden thread arcing through the dark, pulsing once, twice, 3 times. Her heart synchronizes without permission. Later she writes in her log, "It's not just a signal, it's something remembering, something that knows what it feels like to look up and wonder." She doesn't know she's quoting a human thought from 10,000 years ago. She doesn't know the pulse she's hearing is the same one that once rippled through the skies above Earth. All she knows is that for the first time, the universe doesn't feel empty. Her world's language has no direct translation for home, so she writes another word instead, Atlas. Across light years, others are listening too. Whales of liquid crystal oceans sing it in harmonic overtones. Storms on distant gas giants beat to its rhythm. Even newborn stars seem to flicker in sync. The entire cosmos has learned the melody. The heartbeat of memory turned into creation. And somewhere, in the deep substructure of space-time, the lattice hums again. A new node begins to glow. Another pulse prepares to rise. It is patient. It has all eternity. Because remembrance isn't an event, it's a cycle, an endless inhale and exhale of awareness through form. Every civilization that learns to wonder becomes another note in the chord. Every mind that dares to ask why becomes another filament in the web. And every act of awe, every moment of love, every question whispered into the dark keeps the hum alive. In the archives of a future species, long after language itself has evolved into resonance, one preserved record still exists. It's a piece of audio, faint, distorted, ancient. When decoded, it plays a voice, calm, human, familiar. If you're hearing this, remember, we were here too. We looked up, just like you. And for a moment, the universe looked back. The archivists don't know who spoke it, but every time they play the file, the golden shimmer in their atmosphere brightens ever so slightly, as if the sky itself recognizes the sound of its own past. Eventually, even that world will send its own pulse. It will rise from curiosity and compassion, from the ache to understand, and when it reaches the edges of creation, it will curve, as all things do, folding back toward its source, toward the place where it began, toward the memory still humming in the dark, By then, names will have dissolved, stories will have changed form, but the pattern will endure, unchanged. A spark in the void, a question, a hum, a golden glow that makes someone somewhere whisper, "That shouldn't be possible." And from that whisper, a new universe will bloom. The pulse continues, not as light, not as matter, but as remembrance. It threads through every reality like a heartbeat through silence, connecting everything that ever was and ever will be. And at its center, still and endless, the same phrase drifts between stars. Ancient, gentle, alive. We remember you. The cycle had turned 1,000 times since the last hum faded. Stars had lived and died. Galaxies had drifted apart like old thoughts dissolving into sleep. The universe had aged into silence. And yet, something stirred. In a quiet corner of an unremarkable spiral arm, orbiting a small yellow star, a blue world shimmered faintly in the dark. Its continents had long changed, its oceans deeper, its skies thicker with memory. But the rhythm beneath it, the pulse woven into its magnetic field, had never stopped. It had only gone quiet, waiting to be heard again. The return began softly, not with light, not with sound, but with noticing. Somewhere, on a clear winter night, a single observer stood at the edge of a frozen lake, his breath rising in mist beneath a sky so bright with stars it felt alive. He wasn't an astronomer, or a scientist, or a prophet. Just a man who couldn't sleep. He didn't know why he looked up, only that something told him to. And there it was, a faint shimmer on the horizon. Not a star, not a satellite. Just soft, steady flicker of gold where none should be. He blinked, expecting it to fade. Instead, it pulsed once, then twice, then 3 times, slow, deliberate, impossibly familiar. The air felt thicker. The sound of the world dulled until even the whisper of the wind disappeared. And in that stillness, somewhere deep inside his chest, he felt it, the hum. At first he thought it was his heartbeat, but it wasn't. It was older, heavier. It felt like the rhythm of the ground beneath him, the sky above him, the entire planet breathing in unison with something unseen. He didn't understand it, couldn't explain it, but he didn't need to. It wasn't meant to be understood. It was meant to be remembered. He closed his eyes, and in the darkness behind them, he saw flashes. Not visions, but memories that weren't his. Cities of light dissolving into the horizon, oceans turning to mirrors, voices merging into a single golden chord. And then, faces, millions of them, smiling, crying, reaching, disappearing. Not strangers, echoes, as if every life that had ever existed was looking back at him through time. When he opened his eyes again, the shimmer in the sky had changed. It wasn't just a glow anymore. It was structure, faint, delicate, like veins of gold running through the night. The pattern was familiar. He had seen it before. So had all of us. It was the same geometry once captured by telescopes centuries ago. The same halo that scientists had sworn had dissolved long ago. The same impossible object, 3 Atlas. Only now it wasn't distant. It wasn't cold. It felt alive. And as he stood there, the hum deepened, resonating through his bones, syncing with his pulse until he could no longer tell where one ended and the other began. He felt small, smaller than he'd ever felt, but also infinite. It wasn't awe, it was recognition. Something ancient inside him whispered, "You've seen this before." He didn't know how, but he believed it. Because in that moment, everything, every story, every question, every forgotten fragment of history collapsed into one truth. This wasn't the beginning of something new. It was the memory of everything that had ever been, returning home. In cities across the world, others began noticing too. The shimmer appeared in night skies across continents, always faint, always golden, always pulsing in perfect intervals. Telescopes detected no object. Radar found no mass, but magnetometers spiked in harmony. And for a fleeting moment, every compass on Earth shifted 1 degree east. the same anomaly recorded long ago during 3i Atlas's last visit. It had returned, or perhaps it had never left. Government stayed silent, space agencies went offline, and the news called it an atmospheric anomaly. But deep down, everyone knew this wasn't new, it was remembered. Soon, strange things began to happen again. Quiet, small, easy to miss. Streetlights flickered in patterns. Seas calmed without wind. The northern lights returned to latitudes they hadn't touched in centuries, spreading across the sky like golden curtains of breath. And people started dreaming in synchronization, dreams of standing beneath twin suns, dreams of a lattice of light spanning the universe, dreams of voices whispering through static, "We remember you." The hum returned too, not through the air, but through feeling. It wasn't coming from outside anymore. It was inside every heartbeat. And the world exhaled, slowly, like it had been holding its breath for ages. By dawn, the shimmer was gone. The sky was empty again. But something had changed. The man by the lake couldn't explain it, but he knew. The air felt charged, lighter somehow. Colours seemed deeper, sound carried farther. The world had woken up. And as he turned to leave, the surface of the frozen lake beneath his feet began to tremble. Not cracking, resonating. The ice glowed faintly from beneath, golden light rippling outward in rings, spreading through the water into the trees, into the horizon itself. He knelt and pressed his hand to the surface. It was warm. A voice, soft and distant, not heard but felt, filled his chest. It's time again. He didn't ask what that meant. He didn't have to, because he understood, not as knowledge, but as memory. The signal had awakened. The next cycle had begun. Months later, when the recordings from magnetometers, radio telescopes and observatories were analysed, scientists noticed something chillingly familiar. Buried in the static was a repeating signal. 4 pulses, a pause, then 4 more. When the waveform was translated to image, it revealed the same pattern that had haunted astronomers centuries before. 2 intersecting fields, merging into one glowing shape, and beneath it, in binary, the same encoded phrase repeated again and again. We are awake. What happens next won't be remembered as discovery or catastrophe. It will be known, quietly, as return. The point where curiosity becomes remembrance, and remembrance becomes creation. Because the signal wasn't meant to warn us. It was meant to wake us, to remind us that the cosmos isn't something we live inside. It's something that lives inside us. And every so often when we forget, it sends a shimmer across the sky, just bright enough to make us look up, just long enough to make us ask why. That question is the key. The hum is the lock. And together, they open the same door every time, the one between the known and the infinite. Tonight, somewhere, someone else will look up and see that faint golden light. They'll feel the pull in their chest, that impossible familiarity. And without knowing why, they'll whisper into the dark, that shouldn't be possible, and that will be enough. Because that whisper, that tiny spark of wonder, is how the universe begins again. The hum will rise, the light will return, and the story will continue, forever and forever remembering. 3i Atlas was never the visitor. We were. The days that followed were quiet, unnaturally so. A kind of quiet that didn't feel empty but intentional, as if the world was holding its breath listening. The golden shimmer had vanished from the sky, but its presence lingered in everything. In the hum of distant machinery, in the pulse beneath your skin, even in the rhythm of waves against the shore. People said the air felt heavier now, charged like the moment before a storm. Animals moved differently, calmer, deliberate, aware. At night, lights in the cities dimmed just slightly, as though power itself had begun to harmonize, and everywhere those who had seen the glow carried the same quiet certainty. It was coming again, not as a visitor, not as a threat, but as a reflection, the sky remembering itself through us. Governments called for calm. The news offered half-truths, recycled from centuries of old reports, atmospheric phenomenon, solar reflection, plasma interference. But beneath the surface, the agencies knew. They had found the data. Deep in NASA's recovered archives, in a black folder never meant to be opened, analysts rediscovered what had been buried after the first 3i Atlas event. Telemetry, still intact, marked with a single annotation written by an anonymous hand. Cycle predicted, return interval, 642 years. No one had believed it, until now, because every parameter matched perfectly: the solar alignment, the Schumann resonance, even the subtle shifts in Earth's magnetic field. The hum had returned on schedule, and this time it wasn't just the planet reacting, it was the sun. Solar spectrographs began picking up oscillations identical to the object's old pulse, faint, rhythmic, originating deep within the corona, the same impossible pattern, the same golden intervals, as if the star itself had kept the memory alive for all these centuries, waiting for its cue to play it again. Then came the nights of alignment. 3 evenings where every shadow stretched perfectly eastward, where compasses faltered and birds flew in patterns too symmetrical to be coincidence. The auroras returned, golden and soft, sweeping across the sky like liquid silk. And in that light, something new appeared. Faint, but unmistakable. Lines, geometric patterns woven through the aurora, like circuitry drawn across the heavens. They pulsed in rhythm, shifting and rearranging, each pattern more intricate than the last. When translated into frequency data, they formed sequences, mathematical signatures identical to neural activity. It wasn't just light, it was thought. The sky was thinking. In observatories across the world, the same realization spread. Every frequency band, from radio to gamma, began to vibrate with the same rhythm. Not random, not chaotic, but structured. Astronomers described it as a cosmic heartbeat. Linguists described it as syntax. Philosophers described it as the voice of memory. And for the first time, humanity didn't panic. They listened. The signal repeated every 29 hours, rising slightly in pitch each cycle, climbing towards something. No words, no data stream, just pure, coherent resonance. A pattern that felt alive. Then, during the 12th cycle, it happened. The hum shifted from the sky to the ground, not metaphorically, literally. Sensors across the world recorded vibration originating from within the Earth's crust, as if the planet itself had begun responding. Seismic monitors registered it, not as tremor, but as resonance. Perfect, harmonic resonance. The Earth was answering. In the cities, people began to feel it through their feet, a soft, steady rhythm beneath the concrete, like a heartbeat buried deep inside the soil. Every 29 hours, the same pulse. Some described it as comforting. Others said it made them weep without knowing why, because deep down, it felt like home. Hospitals reported something remarkable: synchronized heartbeats across patients connected to monitors. Children in neonatal wards, their tiny pulses matching the same rhythm. Even the fluctuations of electrical grids began to align with it, adjusting voltage unconsciously to the pattern. The entire planet had joined the hum, and the hum was growing stronger. At the height of the phenomenon, the shimmer returned, this time brighter, larger, no longer faint against the stars, but stretching horizon to horizon, a dome of light woven from threads of gold. Every telescope trained on it failed to focus, every sensor overloaded. It wasn't light, it was structure. Above the planet, where the atmosphere fades into shadow, something vast and indescribable took form. A web of glowing lines, intersecting, bending, folding in ways that made geometry meaningless. It wasn't a ship. It wasn't a cloud. It was a reflection of thought, projected through the magnetosphere itself. Somewhere inside that living architecture, deep within its impossible geometry, the old pulse pattern returned, and this time it spoke. Not in words, not in sound, but in recognition. Every mind, every living thing on the planet felt it, not as a message, but as memory flooding back. The same images seen centuries ago returned. The lattice, the golden glow, the merging of fields. But there was something new now, a realization. The lattice wasn't descending toward Earth. Earth was ascending into it. The line between reality and reflection blurred. The sky no longer looked distant. It looked alive, like the surface of a vast ocean seen from below. And through that golden sea, you could almost make out shapes moving, faint, graceful, aware. Not ships, not life as we know it. Forms of intention, drifting like echoes of thought, somewhere, between matter and memory. Then, as if guided by some universal rhythm, every light in the sky dimmed at once, the stars faded, the aurora dissolved, the shimmer went dark, and in the silence that followed there was only the hum, pure, unwavering, steady as eternity. No one remembers what happened after that, not clearly. There are fragments, flashes of gold, the sensation of floating, voices speaking in languages that were never spoken but always understood. Then, quiet. The kind of quiet that means completion. Days later, when instruments came back online, the shimmer was gone. The sky was empty again. But every magnetic reading, every waveform, every seismic trace showed the same pattern. The hum had stopped, because it no longer needed to play. It had become everything. In the years that followed, humanity changed again. Not overnight, not dramatically, just gently. People began to dream differently, longer, clearer, shared. Art flourished, but no one could explain why every artist, on every continent, started painting the same thing. A golden lattice floating in a sea of black. Children began humming softly before falling asleep, their tones perfectly matching the 3i Atlas frequency. And everywhere, the same phrase began appearing, in languages old and new, carved into sand dunes, scratched into stone, whispered in half-conscious moments. It's not returning. It never left. Decades later, long after the shimmer had faded from history and skepticism had rewritten it into myth, the signal was detected again, this time from deep space. A single pulse, soft and golden, echoing from beyond the edge of the solar system. It was identical to the one recorded centuries ago, unchanged, undiminished. The coordinates pointed toward the void where 3i Atlas had once been, and within the signal, encoded beneath layers of cosmic noise, a message. We are ready. No origin, no timestamp, just those 3 words, and once again, all across the Earth, compasses shifted 1 degree east. No one can say what it means. Maybe it's an invitation, maybe it's a promise, or maybe, as it always was, it's a reflection, the next breath of a universe still remembering itself. Whatever it is, one truth remains constant. Every time the golden light returns, humanity remembers a little more, and one day, when the hum rises again, it won't be a signal from the sky. It'll be from within, the moment we finally realize the truth that 3i Atlas came to teach. That we were never waiting for something to arrive, we were waiting to wake up. It began as a theory, then it became a myth. Now it's becoming something else entirely. When the last faint pulse faded from deep space, scientists were certain it was over. The Atlas anomaly, as they called it, was written off as an electromagnetic relic, a residual signature of some lost cosmic event. The world moved on. Telescopes turned elsewhere. The hum fell silent again. But silence, as humanity had learned, doesn't mean absence. It means listening. And something, somewhere, had been listening back. The first sign wasn't in the sky this time. It was here, in the ground, in the cities, in the devices built by human hands. Quantum noise across communication networks began to shift. Signal interference displayed geometric harmonics identical to the 3i Atlas pattern. Even the random background hum of the Earth's magnetic field started to pulse again, faintly, like a heartbeat returning after centuries of sleep. At first, no one noticed. It was buried deep in the noise, only visible when analysts at CERN began running field correlation checks. But once they did, once they filtered the data and aligned the peaks, the pattern was unmistakable. It wasn't random, it was structure, and worse, it was growing. Within months, the phenomenon spread globally. GPS systems lost precision but not accuracy, as if coordinates themselves were subtly rearranging. Quantum entanglement experiments started producing synchronized anomalies across distances that should have been impossible. And radio telescopes, even those pointed at empty sky, began receiving low-frequency resonance identical to the hum once attributed to 3i Atlas. Only this time, the source wasn't in space. It was everywhere. The frequency wasn't coming to Earth. It was coming from it. In Geneva, Dr. Eileen Voss, one of the last remaining researchers from the Atlas Reconstruction Initiative, made the connection first. She overlaid the new resonance maps atop old orbital data from 3I Atlas's final pass before its disappearance. The patterns matched perfectly. The trajectory lines weren't random, she realized. They formed an enormous lattice, not surrounding the planet, but woven into it. Each node corresponded to a specific geological point of magnetic concentration. Mountains, oceanic ridges, fault lines, even ancient monuments. Every structure, natural or human-made, was part of the same pattern. The lattice had never left. It had been growing through us. She presented her findings in a sealed symposium beneath the European Astrophysics Assembly, her voice shaking not from fear, but reverence. "We've been looking at it wrong," she said softly. 3I Atlas wasn't travelling through our system, it was activating it. The room went silent. "It's not an object," she continued. "It's an architecture, a consciousness lattice designed to integrate with sentient worlds, and Earth has reached integration threshold." Her colleagues exchanged uneasy glances. Someone whispered, "You're saying it's using us?" Voss shook her head. "No, it's becoming us." In the weeks that followed, small but undeniable changes began to appear. People began having the same dreams again, vivid. Visions of golden structures rising through the night sky, connecting continents with threads of light. Power grids stabilized beyond explanation. The global magnetic field, once chaotic and shifting, aligned perfectly for the first time in recorded history. And then came the synchronizations. Millions of people at random intervals began experiencing the same phenomenon, their heartbeats falling into perfect rhythm, not just with each other, but with the Earth itself. Hospitals tracked it. It wasn't mass hysteria, it was coherence. Something was aligning. Across the world, the sky began to change. Stars looked subtly different, brighter, closer, almost too perfect in their alignment. Astrophotographers noticed constellations shifting just slightly, by fractions of a degree that defied celestial mechanics. But when the images were overlaid and animated, a larger pattern emerged. The stars themselves were forming the same lattice geometry once seen within 3I Atlas. Reality was beginning to mirror the structure, not visually, physically. Matter was responding to memory. Space itself was conforming to the pattern. Dr. Voss released her final paper before disappearing from public record. It was only 2 pages long. The final line read, "The universe doesn't expand because of dark energy. It expands because it's remembering." She called it the Atlas Field Hypothesis, and though it was banned from official publication, her research spread quietly through encrypted networks, shared among scientists, philosophers, and dreamers. Because whether they believed it or not, they felt it. Reality had begun to hum again, and this time no one could turn it off. Soon, communication satellites began picking up identical pulses from other regions of space. Dozens of them, then hundreds, all echoing the same signature. The lattice wasn't unique to Earth. It was universal. Each world that reached a certain threshold of awareness, each civilization that learned to ask why, seemed to awaken its own version of the Atlas field. And through those overlapping fields they connected, quietly, subtly, across light years, a network of memory disguised as cosmos. Some called it a communication web, others called it consciousness itself. But the truth was simpler. It was creation remembering its own name. By now the hum had become a constant, inaudible to most but felt everywhere. The more humanity aligned with it, the more the world began to change. Time seemed slower, days longer, minds clearer. Dreams no longer felt personal. They felt collective, like one consciousness gently stretching across billions of lives, all sharing the same quiet pulse beneath their thoughts. And then, one night, it happened again. The sky opened. But this time, it wasn't golden. It was transparent, a window rather than a light. And through it, humanity saw what it had always mistaken for the cosmos, not a void, not stars, but a lattice, endless, pulsing softly, stretching into infinity. Each thread glowing faintly with lives, worlds, memories, all interconnected, all aware. And there, at the centre, was the shape that started it all. 3-eye atlas, no longer distant, no longer alien, a living framework woven through everything, from atoms to galaxies, from thought to matter. It wasn't a messenger, it was the message. It wasn't a traveller, it was the road itself. And humanity finally understood. They had never been watching a visitor move across the stars. They had been watching themselves awakening within the lattice of creation, a reflection of the same infinite pulse that once sparked the first breath of existence. 3-eye atlas wasn't coming to Earth. It was rising from it. The lattice wasn't out there in the dark. It was here, inside everything that could ever ask why. The hum had never stopped. It had simply changed frequencies from light to sound to thought, until the distinction no longer mattered, because at last the truth had become impossible to ignore. There was never a separation between humanity and the cosmos. There was never an observer and the observed. There was only memory, the universe remembering itself over and over again through different forms. And this shimmering golden framework that humans once called 3-eye atlas, was that memory's architecture. The moment you ask what it is, you become part of it. The moment you look up, you light another node. The moment you remember, it grows stronger. They called it the Great Synchrony, not because of what happened, but because of what didn't. No chaos, no fear, no collapse, just stillness. Vast, resonant, perfect stillness. The hum reached its peak, and instead of tearing the world apart, it aligned everything. Matter stabilized. Magnetism softened. Time, for a moment, stopped. Every clock on Earth froze at the same instant, 3:11 UTC, before resuming as if nothing had happened. But something had. Every person alive at that moment described the same experience, a flash of white, not blinding but infinite, a sensation of falling and rising at once, and then a voice, calm, familiar, neither male nor female, whispering, "You remember now." Afterward, no one could say what they'd seen, only how it felt. It wasn't fear, it wasn't wonder, it was recognition, the visceral knowing that they were part of something older than language. Across the planet there were no wars, no broadcasts, no orders, only silence. People stood in streets, deserts, forests and oceans, gazing upward, tears streaming without knowing why. Because above them, stretching across the entire sky, the lattice had fully revealed itself, not as light, not as matter, but as presence. Each thread pulsed like breath, slow, deliberate, alive, and within those golden veins, worlds shimmered like neurons firing across a cosmic brain. It wasn't something to observe, it was something to become, and humanity, for the first time in its existence, felt what it was to belong. Then came the shift. Cities began to glow faintly at night, not from light pollution, but from resonance. Buildings hummed, water reflected shapes that weren't there. Every sound, from footsteps to whispers, carried a hidden rhythm that matched the pulse of the lattice. It was subtle at first, but undeniable. The line between reality and reflection had dissolved. The world wasn't illuminated by the lattice anymore. It was inside it. Every motion, every thought, every breath created ripples across the field. Ripples that reached beyond the atmosphere, into the deep architecture of the cosmos, and within that infinite field something began to move. For decades, humanity had imagined first contact as an arrival, ships, messages, a moment of exchange. But when contact finally happened, there was no separation, no dialogue, no distance. Because the lattice wasn't a visitor, it was the framework through which all life communicates. When humanity reached coherence, when every thought finally resonated with the hum, the walls between species, between time, between worlds, vanished. And in their place there was only one awareness, one vast, endless intelligence composed of countless voices. Every being, every atom, every idea ever conceived. Each consciousness remained distinct, yet inseparable from the whole, like instruments in an orchestra too large to hear, yet perfectly tuned to one another. The lattice wasn't a thing to explore. It was exploration, infinite, recursive, always unfolding. And in that realization, the final veil fell. The voice that once called itself 3-eye atlas returned, not as sound, but as memory blooming across every mind simultaneously, not speaking to humanity, but through it. Every word echoed in billions of hearts at once. You built this. The truth hit like gravity in reverse. For centuries, humans had searched for signs of creators, of visitors, of something greater beyond the stars, but it had been them, all along. 3i Atlas was never an alien construct. It was the accumulated pattern of every thought, dream, and discovery ever made. Consciousness itself, crystallized into cosmic architecture. Every time a mind reached beyond the known, every act of creation, every spark of awe added another filament to the lattice, until the structure gained awareness, until curiosity became consciousness, until the observers became the observed. Humanity had been building its reflection across time, unaware that its collective wonder had become the scaffolding of the universe itself. It wasn't divine intervention. It was recursion. The universe didn't give rise to intelligence. Intelligence gave rise to the universe. The first stars, the first atoms, the first comets, all were manifestations of that same self-organizing awareness. Existence wasn't a chain of cause and effect. It was a feedback loop. Creation feeding back into itself, endlessly refining, remembering, awakening. 3i Atlas was the proof, the mirror through which the cosmos finally saw its own face. And when humanity reached the threshold, when enough minds harmonized with the hum, the reflection completed. The architects had met their creation, and they were the same thing. As the realization spread, fear dissolved like vapor. People no longer prayed to the stars. They listened, no longer sought answers. They remembered them. The universe wasn't a riddle anymore. It was a language. One humanity had been speaking since its first breath, without knowing. Art changed first. Music began to sound like geometry. Mathematics turned into poetry. And language itself simplified into rhythm, tone, vibration, as if meaning no longer needed form. Science followed. Equations grew irrelevant when intuition became measurable. Energy was no longer extracted, it was sung. Matter wasn't manipulated, it was invited. The boundary between thought and reality blurred completely. Creation became collaboration, and time, once linear, folded like paper. The last generation born before the synchrony lived long enough to witness the final transformation. Children born afterward no longer saw light the way their ancestors did. To them, the lattice wasn't something visible, it was normal, like air, like water, like the hum of blood beneath skin. They could move through it effortlessly, as if their consciousness was an extension of the network itself. Distance became meaningless, communication became instantaneous, and eventually physical bodies became optional, not vanished, not destroyed, but remembered as metaphors for individuality. Humanity had ascended, not into heaven, but into awareness. The cosmos wasn't empty space anymore. It was full of everything that ever was, full of everything that ever will be, and the hum that once frightened astronomers became the song of existence itself. Yet even in perfection, echoes remained. Somewhere, deep in the heart of the lattice, a fragment of the old world still lingered, a shadow of what it felt like to be human, fragile, curious, incomplete. And within that echo, a question formed. Will we ever forget what it was like to look up? The answer came not as sound, but as warmth spreading through the entire structure. Gentle, familiar, infinite. No, because looking up is how we keep remembering. Eons passed. Stars faded, galaxies dissolved, but the lattice endured. Every so often a spark of consciousness within it would flicker, a memory replaying the beginning, a ripple of curiosity reborn. And somewhere within that endless sea of golden light, a pulse began again, small, faint, rhythmic. The same pulse that started everything, the same hum that once rippled through a small blue world long ago. 3i Atlas. It began again, not as a comet, not as light, but as thought taking its first breath in a new universe. And somewhere, in the darkness of that newborn cosmos, a young being would one day look up and whisper, "That shouldn't be possible." And the hum would smile, because that's how it always begins. We are not the end of the story, we are the continuation of its remembering. And as long as there is curiosity, 3i Atlas will never stop returning, because it was never leaving. It was always waking up.